and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's episode 122. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the most effective man from the South. That's right, Mr. Mark Pearson Freeland. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Mike. I don't know whether I could claim all of the effective and efficientness here today because we're actually doing episode 122 and we're doing part 2 of a particularly effective man, aren't we?
We are indeed, and boy, that the show last week was an absolute classic. It was so good that we broke this up into 2 shows. But where do we go today, Mark?
Well, last week, as our listeners might remember, it was episode 121, and we were digging into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But as you rightly point out, Mike, there's a lot of content and a lot of great tips and habits that Stephen Covey calls out in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So, like you say, we split them up. So last week, we were digging into habits 1, 2, and 3 of the 7 habits. And this week, in episode 122, we are digging into habits 4, 5, 6, and 7 of Stephen Covey's habits.
Would you say, Mark, that last week we sorted ourselves out on the inside, and this episode we are going to deal with all of that good stuff: teamwork, collaboration, connecting with others, getting people excited about your ideas. It's all about those social interactions that surround our work, isn't it?
Yeah, last week was really around getting our minds into gear, wasn't it? Habits 1, 2, and 3 are focused on self-mastery, as Stephen calls it, and it's moving a little bit away from that personality ethic, as you might remember, and thinking more about character, what's your integrity or your courage and so on. And only by really establishing that foundation, as we learned in episode 121, can we really now move on into the next habits. And like you say, these habits are all around teamwork, collaboration, communication, and all of those end up in pretty special habit number 7 as well, which I'm pretty excited to get into later in the show.
Yeah, we've got so much ahead in this show because I think what's really important is the way in which Covey has written the book, that he gives you these really nice foundational flows of ideas that build upon each other. So what you can expect in today's show is we're really going to be thinking about how to understand the people you're working with, how to find ideas that work for them and you. And if you get really good at this, if you do achieve that level of mastery, not only will you make it good for you and them, but this formula of 1 + 1 = 3. So how you can make this partnership, this collaboration, not just good for each other, but the sort of sum result of it is going to be good. A special sense of magic, I guess, because you get 1 + 1 = 3, which is very, very apt for this day and age. Because if you think about most of us, we're all working in the knowledge economy, meaning that it is about our ideas. And ideas are very social beasts. And we're going to learn the skills of presenting, building, collaborating on ideas, working together. And I think this is very exciting for anybody who has to solve problems, think of ideas. They will know, as Patrick Lencioni said, that it is a team sport. You can't sit isolated in a little box and solve all these things. It's a team sport. And I think coming up on this show, we've got the right tools to win at this team sport.
Oh, I couldn't have said it better myself, Mike. And actually, in fact, Stephen would agree with you. There are no shortcuts. So only by hitting each of these habits together, focusing on yourself, can you go out and be most effective with your team. So we've obviously covered the first 3 habits last week in the previous show. So I thought we should really begin ourselves and warm ourselves up for the next 4 habits by listening to Stephen Covey actually reintroducing us back into his program, reintroducing us to the 7 habits of highly effective people. So this first clip, our intro clip, is going to be from Stephen himself telling us about investing in yourself.
The essential purpose of the 7 habits of highly effective people is to learn how to lead your life in a truly effective way. To describe what the 7 habits material is, let me share with you what it is not. It is not a quick fix program. It is not a program of the month. It is a process of personal and interpersonal growth and development that will require not only your continuing best efforts, but also your patience. As we all know, real growth and development cannot take place overnight. You must pay the price over an extended period of time to reap the benefits of these habits. Implementing the 7 habits will be an upward personal climb, like a journey up a steep mountain. It won't be easy. It will be a challenge. As you ascend the mountain, so to speak, with this 7 habits material, you'll become acutely aware of the loose gravel, the loose rocks in your life. You may slip occasionally, maybe even fall back a time or two. You will feel the gravity pull of old habits working against you. But I'll assure you, as you continue in your climb and endure in your efforts, you will begin to feel a level of exhilaration and of attaining entirely new heights in your life, higher and higher levels of effectiveness. By applying this effort, you can expect to increase your capacity to achieve your personal and professional goals and to develop better working relationships with your associates and all of your loved ones. In short, you can expect to become more effective. Let me suggest that the best way to get the most out of the 7 habits is to be very open-minded, to be open to self-discovery. Participate, really get involved. Look for ways to apply and to implement these habits in your life. You see, our habits form our character. You may have heard the quote, "Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny." For our purposes, we will define a habit as the intersection of knowledge, skill, and desire. You see, knowledge is the theoretical component. That is the what to do and the why to do it. Skill is the practical side of how to do it. And desire is the motivation side, the want to do it. In order to make something a habit in our lives, we literally must have all 3 components. Habits are powerful factors in our lives. They constantly express our character. They determine the level of our effectiveness or our ineffectiveness. In the words of an English poet, we first make our habits, then our habits make us. The 7 habits are simply common sense organized. But remember, what is common sense is not always common practice. So I encourage you to make the investment, put forth the time and effort. Focus on the kinds of changes you can make consistently and over time to develop these habits.
Mark, I think we just played the most moonshots clip in the history of 122 shows. That has just blown me off my chair. I was writing down all the things I liked in it, and I just stopped because that was just so good. Mark, I think we can do the whole show on that clip now.
we can just break down each of Stephen's points there. I mean, how good is Stephen Covey?
Seriously, I'm not joking when I say I think that's the most moonshot clip we've ever had, because in that was not only the practices, but this story of embracing hardship and sticking to it. It's not going to come easy. It's not going to come quickly, but it will come over time. And this idea that habits make the man. Oh my gosh, that is so good. And it is so true, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it's so true because, again, you're in charge of your reactions, as we learned last week. You're not to respond, but be proactive. You've got to own these decisions. You've got to own, most importantly in that clip, the practice of doing these habits, because they don't come easy. Like you were saying just before we played the intro clip, these things do take that little bit of time. And they aren't easy. And exactly as Stephen calls out in that, we are the masters of our destiny, I think, as he puts it. And if you can break down these 7 habits, if you can take ownership of the way that you react to obstacles, as Ryan Holiday would have said, or Joe Rogan, or David Goggins, in fact, anybody in our catalog, if you can start to own that, that's really what they're all saying, isn't it? Own your reaction and go out and make that difference.
They really are, and it speaks to so many different authors, experts, entrepreneurs, creators that we have studied together. I mean, to me, this has a really strong flavor of Ryan Holiday and Stoic thinking, doesn't it? It's really got that sort of, you got to work hard, right?
Yeah, you've got to accept that it's going to be a mountain climb, and when the gravel gets that little bit loose, don't worry, because the journey end will be so much more valid when you get there, because you would have persevered, you would have found that personal growth, you would achieve those personal goals, whether they're professional or relationship, and you would have become a better version by going through all of those hardships. I mean, it's spot on, exactly what you and I like learning from these superstars.
That's why it's like it really is like a manifesto to what we do here on the show. And I could see that if James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, was listening, his book came some 40 years after that of Stephen Covey's, but he would be in violent agreement that habits are not just for today and tomorrow. As Covey started in that clip, they are a lifestyle. And that was something we really called out from James Clear, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. You have to own the challenge, I suppose, of doing daily increments, right? Yeah. The Atomic Habits build from atomic level, very small, but over time they become actually easier and easier, don't they? Because it becomes your new habit is trying to create that new habit.
Yeah, and it's a lifestyle. It's permanent. This is not just a quick fix. And that gets me really fired up to jump now into the first step into mastering teamwork and working with others. And the first of the habits that we're going to dig into in this second part of our study of the habits of highly effective people by Stephen Covey is all about the idea of win-win. And I want to encourage you, Mark, and all of our listeners to really sit back and enjoy this thinking that we're going to get from Stephen Covey, because this, I think, is really foundational. If you really want to collaborate well, then you must, as Stephen Covey would say, find the win-win.
Win-lose poisons the mind. You don't trust anything, see? Habit 4, think win-win, lies at the very heart of all relationships. Think win-win is the habit of mutual benefit. It's the habit of the golden rule. It's the habit of abundance. The underlying paradigm or principle is abundance. There is plenty out there and to spare. So you don't have to be threatened by the strengths of other people. You can nurture competency around you higher than your own. It doesn't threaten you. You can share knowledge. You love to share knowledge. You can share recognition, gain, profit. But if people derive their sense of worth from being compared, from the external, from the social value system out there, how well they stack up, they're always in a state of anxiety. They're always studying the pecking order. They're concerned about how they're dressed, how they look. They're into posturing, and they are threatened by competency around them. They feel that if they share knowledge, they lose unique advantage. It gives others the same awareness they have. They lose some power. If they share power, they have less. It's like a piece of pie. There's only so much. If you get the recognition, I may not get it. If I share gain or profit with you, we will have less. It's the paradigm of scarcity, not the paradigm of abundance. Most people have never had profound experiences with win-win people. They don't really believe there's such a thing as win-win. It's either you win or you lose. You're either tough or you're soft. You're strong or you're weak, see? They think in dichotomies, either or. Those people will inevitably produce politicized cultures where politics run things, reading tea leaves, social inventions, natural laws will not govern. Or they will become martyrs. They'll go for lose-win, particularly among the so-called important people. And then they'll often take out their energy on the ones that they can control, so that they're lose-win above, win-lose below. What happens at the side all depends on the moods, the ego. What happens in the marriage, is it equal? Is it unequal? What happens with the kids? What about your employees? Can you begin to see that the roots of the win-win mindset comes deep out of the private victory? If the private victory is real and sincere, you're at peace.
This is a pretty big clip, Mike, because where my mind immediately goes is I think you're almost brought up to protect yourself. And I think part of what Stephen's calling out in Think Win-Win is the acceptance that you shouldn't hoard knowledge. You shouldn't hoard experience in your own immediate inner circle, but instead use the experience that you've got from past moments, as well as knowledge that perhaps you've learned, and share that with others. This idea of abundance, share the abundance, the food for thought with others in order to make that team as effective and as powerful as possible. Because when you're only one person with all those skills, you're not going to be able to scale or grow or really achieve a huge successful moment, are you?
Oh my gosh, there's so much in this clip.
It's a big one.
Oh my gosh, we need a third show, Mark. So here, building on what you just said, I think if we've done the work where we really know the subject matter, whether it might be a particular problem that we're trying to solve, whether it's a sort of an area of craft and expertise, I think it starts with having put in the work, that you know your stuff. I think you create the conditions by which you are happy to give away your counsel, your knowledge and ideas first. And I think that is essential to creating the win-win. So when we do meet people, don't sit there maybe entertaining a lose-win kind of paradigm. Give them your advice. For example, I spoke with a potential new client just this week, and I gave them advice and criteria by which they should consider the best partner for them in building this big, brand new product full of all sorts of good tech stuff. And I stressed on how they can have a successful process of finding the right partner, because it's big, it's complex. Obviously that creates a lot of anxiety about who's going to be the right partner for them. And I was focusing on, if I was in your shoes, here are a couple of things you really need to make sure you manage in this process, and that you have the right conversations and the right prioritization. And I think you can learn from those kind of moments where you give that counsel to help them, which may seem a little counterintuitive, because you're kind of like, you might be tempted to say, pick me, we're great,
Yep.
But I think if we enter and this is a real personal mantra of mine, enter every conversation with the goal of trying to give a gift in the conversation. Regardless of who it is. So, I'm not doing it with my wife every single time we talk, but like when you come to these meaningful interactions, enter them. Let's say you're talking to a potential employee. Let's say you're talking to a potential partner or client, or an important internal conversation. Think about how you might give a gift. And by that, you give an idea, or just create a new way of thinking about the problem. And everyone goes, actually, maybe that'll work. Like that, for me, that's a gift. And that is win-win thinking, the abundance thinking, the growth mindset. I think it's all about don't hold back, because that's like one of the lose sort of paradigms that Covey was talking about. If we can all go into conversations looking to give before we get, and just give good advice. I mean, look, if you've studied something, Mark, and you're a real expert at it, what's the use of bottling it all up and hoarding that expertise?
Exactly.
Right? Don't you think it's so much better, like, give it freely out in the world, right?
Give it freely, and like you say, give it as a gift. If you can enrich your existing customer relationships by proposing something that maybe they haven't considered. And actually, I believe that what you just gave as a demonstration there of talking to a potential partner and giving them the tools to make the right decision for them is a great demonstration of a relationship. It's a great demonstration of, look, I respect you. I want you to make the right decision for you guys. Maybe we're not the right fit. That's okay. But I want us to be equals as we come into that decision. And I think that's really bang on what Stephen Covey's calling out in win-win, isn't it? Because they're mutually beneficial.
Yes. So let's continue on this one, because I think without the win-win, I don't think the other habits that we've got coming up really work that well if we haven't nailed this. Shall we explore, Mark, the sort of the win-win framework that Covey gives in the book, and let's talk about these ideas of courage and consideration. Do you want to kick off how we might think about win-win?
Yes, exactly. Well, as you say, in Think Win-Win, you've got two, it's all about establishing these effective relationships, isn't it? It's between yourself, maybe a team, maybe a partner, maybe a colleague or a customer and so on. But ultimately, the best thing that you want to create are those win-win moments, isn't it? You want to create a win-win situation, because otherwise one person is always going to be less successful or maybe more negatively impacted. And in solving for that win-win moment, you've got to consider those two factors that you've just mentioned. It's courage as well as consideration. And the way that the quadrant chart might look is if you've got high courage and low courage, high consideration and low consideration, they compare. When you've got a moment of high courage, i.e., I'm willing to share, I'm willing to go out there and expose myself, along with that high consideration of the other party. So I respect the other individual and I want to achieve that mutually beneficial moment. That, Mike, is a win-win because both people win. I'm feeling comfortable with the situation, as well as my the party on the other side of the table.
Right. Let's unpack those a little bit. Let's go even deeper. I think we're like at level 3, 4, 5, or 6 here. I'm not sure, but we're going deep, Mark. So I think the way to think of a win-win construct is where you have the courage to think big and respect what you're really trying to do, your purpose, your team, your company. That's the courage bit, right? The consideration is inverting that and being considerate of the same dynamic, but for the other person, okay? So you want to deeply understand, respect, and find the win for the person that you're talking with, and to have the courage to look for the win for yourself. So when you bring a win-win deal together, here's how it's going to look. It's going to be tough to get there because there's a sort of a leap of faith because you're thinking big. And the atmosphere, the way you get that done is really empathetic. There's a real sense of an earnest sense of trying to create the win-win situation. Now, what I would propose to you, Mark, is that we know when we don't have win-win. Like if it's tough to get to win-win because you have to have that leap and you've got to be super empathetic and not fall for the ego. I mean, could you imagine Ryan Holiday listening to Covey then, thinking about we all get bad results when we let our egos take over. When we try and win the deal rather than get the win-win deal, we get the win-lose. We beat them. We got them, right? Very Ryan Holiday about ego is the enemy, don't you think?
Yeah, it's bang on. The ego is something that would impact that win-lose situation you've just said. You know, yeah, it's all about me. I've got that success. Yeah, I've got that sale. But what have I created? it's a relationship with no trust.
That's right. So if you look at the quadrant, and the win-win is a tough one, but it's done, which is very collaborative, really empathetic. What does it look like when the deal is not a win-win, Mark? How would you characterize those if you look at the quadrant?
I mean, for me, there's always going to be a party that loses, whether it's myself or the partner that I'm joining up with. I mean, just to compare what we were just saying about the big ego, but losing more consideration of the other party and ending up in a win-lose situation where you're very tough, but you're not very nice. So the relationship has not been created in the best way.
Exactly.
The adverse of that, or the mirror effect of that, is something that probably some of our listeners have experienced before, where they've been really happy with the consideration of the other party. You've given the customer everything that they want. You've really respected them. You listen to them. You've put in time. You've invested money. You've put in everything to get to a point of, perhaps collaboration, but you haven't respected yourself. You've given away too much. And what's ended up happening is that seesaw has now gone over to a lose-win situation, because you have been in a slightly weaker position and you haven't respected yourself. So what you've ended up with is an unfair balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So I think the mutuality of a win-win deal, the empathy that is required for a win-win deal, is the way to go. And I think the rule is, and I know, I'm guilty of it, everyone's guilty of it, of falling into the ego trap and trying to get the points on the board for you. I think the rule here is get the points on the board for them as well. So it's interesting now. This really kind of builds a perfect bridge into the next clip. And this is all about, okay, imagine that we've just thought about this win-win construct and we're like, yeah, got it. That's habit number 4. Well, this is exactly where habit 5 picks up, because it's all about seeking to first understand and then be understood. And this is really good thinking, because you might refer to things such as servant leadership. You might have heard of topics like active listening and all of that kind of good stuff. So let's go to the master himself and let's find out what it truly means to seek first to understand, then to be understood.
You study every field of human endeavor. You study every problem-solving process in every profession without an exception. And you'll always find to understand precedes action. To understand precedes judgment. Lawyers go through a discovery process, often even prepare the case for the opposing counsel. Doctors diagnose before they prescribe. Teachers pre-assess before they teach. What does the amateur salesperson do? Sells products. What does the professional salesperson do? Sells solutions. It's habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. The tendency in almost all people initially is to want to be understood, or if they do seek to understand, they seek with the intent to reply, with the intent to in some way influence, to some way bring the person about, to accomplish their own end, not with the intent to understand. Now, what's your first name?
Hal.
Hal? Why does Hal wear those glasses?
See better.
Okay, but what did the optometrist do before he prescribed? He diagnosed. The optometrist tried to understand. The optometrist was first influenced before attempting to influence.
I love that little story, or that little interaction with Stephen Covey, because it's for me at least, a perfect way of understanding habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood, rather than, listening to a customer come into the optician and say, hey, I need glasses. And then the optician say, yeah, great. Well, here you go. I've just made a sale, or I've accomplished my ambition, my goal. I've given a customer a pair of glasses. Instead, he sits back and says, okay, well, no, let's actually understand your problem. In fact, Mike, your earlier example of talking to a partner earlier this week and listening to the requirements that they had and helping them diagnose the decision-making of choosing a partner, I think, again, is exactly what this habit's all about. You're trying to first understand where the customer is and then to see if you can help them.
Yeah, and this helps you in so many ways, because when you're seeking to understand, sometimes what might be revealed if you just and I had to do this. I have to remind myself of this because I'm a bit of a chatterbox. But in my earlier career, I really had to fix the desire to want to be first and the smartest in the room all the time. So I had to correct myself and basically just shut the hell up and listen. And the interesting thing about that is listening and asking clarification questions before jumping into, okay, well, here's how we fix that, or here's what we should do, or here's what we can do for you. Just take the time to listen, to understand, because a couple of things happen. One, you may realize, this person is talking about this problem, but actually there's a much bigger problem here. Or you might be talking to someone who you might be doing a new project with, or potentially doing a project with, and you might go, actually, I don't think we're a very good fit. And so what happens is you avoid chasing projects, deals, initiatives where there's actually not a good fit. If you're just always broadcasting and not understanding, then you're going to spend all this energy, and then somewhere down the line, you're going to realize, oops, this didn't really work. So for me, the real power here is much like the win-win. If you know your stuff, take the time just to listen to the other person, whether it's a colleague, a peer, a client, a partner. Just listen. I love this idea of, I always challenge myself that particularly when I'm dealing with a third party, let's say it's a client and they come and they've go, oh, we've got this problem. Could you help us? Don't rush to the solution. Always ask. I always set myself this rule of asking 3 clarification questions before I propose a suggestion. And that's just a way I prevent myself going on broadcast. I mean, how do you do it, Mike? If you want to understand before running out and saying, hey, here's my solution, here's my idea, how do you do it?
Your story actually reminded me of the way that Toyota do it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they ask, is it the 7 whys?
5 whys.
The 5 whys, yes. Yeah, that's perfect, isn't it? So they're seeking to understand.
That's a great one, Mark. Just go, okay, let's say you said to me, I want to do a triathlon. And I would say, why? And you're like, oh, because it sounds fun. Why is that fun? And then before you know it, what Toyota believes is that if you ask why 5 times, you get to the source of all ideas, all problems. You get to the foundation, the first principle.
I would agree. Again, because of these habits that we're talking about right now in Stephen Covey's book are all about teamwork, aren't they? They're understanding one another, and you can't do that unless you are able to, effectively interact in the right way. And this is a pure demonstration, isn't it? It's demonstrating to the other party, hey, I can understand where you're coming from, and that's okay.
But, if you do this at the beginning, the funny thing is that everything just goes much better, because in any collaborative teamwork moment, if you seek first to understand the people around the table with you, then you'll be able to bring things together, solve problems, seize opportunities far better, far quicker, because you're aligned. And I think this is a big thing, we talk about in the modern sort of ways of working here in 2021 is getting people on board and aligning. the best thing you can do is like, hey, Mark, we're here to talk about this big project. What are your first thoughts on it? And just like, shut up, listen, maybe clarify a little bit, but don't get ahead of yourself and say, wow, here's what we should do, Mark. Blah, 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 blah. No, listen.
In my experience, what happens when you take that former route and say, right, this is what we're going to do. I'm just going to tell you what works for us and you should follow us. It shows that you're not listening or understanding that person. And fundamentally, it kind of makes the other party feel like they're being manipulated,
right?
Doesn't it? And suddenly any idea of a long-term trusting relationship is kind of getting weaker and weaker because the other party might be questioning, okay, well, where's this person coming from? What's their motive? Why do I no longer trust them? And that's really dangerous, isn't it?
It is. And you know what? I think that whenever we want to work with others and get people on board, the more time you take at the beginning to understand where they're at, what they're trying to do, I believe the better things go in the long term. So you might be tempted to think, like having all these discussions and conversations, getting context and asking why 5 times, all that good stuff. Don't for a moment think it's a bad investment because it compounds, and later down the track, you're so aligned, things can move really, really quickly. And when things unravel on a project, on a partnership, on a deal, you will often find that the root cause is misunderstanding, isn't it, Mark?
I would totally agree because, when you don't, it's the same with a teamwork. It's a couple, it's a relationship, it's parents and their children. When two parties don't understand each other, what happens? There's friction. There's, as you'd say, loggerheads. You're bashing together because you're not communicating correctly. Yeah. And that's exactly what you've just said. You can't have a good relationship unless the foundations are really strong right at the very beginning.
And you can also do this not only like when it's sort of an informal discussion or meeting, but you can also do this in presentations. One thing, Mark, that I really suggest here, and you've seen me do this, is I always will start a public presentation or speech or a talk by saying, hey, I'm going to talk about this topic. And what I'm hoping to do is to give you at least one idea, one practical thing that you could use in your work right after we finish. Like I always start with rooting the conversation or the presentation in what I hope to do for you. And I want to give you something. I've thought about what you guys are doing, and I think I've got a ton of ideas that I'm going to share with you. I hope, I've really tried to design it so at least one of these will hit the target. And I think that's a very nice way of being empathetic towards your audience and saying, look, I got a smorgasbord of goodies here. Oh, I'm hoping one tastes good, right?
Yeah. I hope one is rememberable. You can walk away.
Useful.
And you've got that value.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, good stuff, this understanding. But you know what? You know who else we like to understand better?
Is it our listeners, Mike?
Oh, Mark, you are tuned in indeed.
Are we? I was going to tease the next habit.
No.
I feel like we're synergizing.
Don't synergize yet. But we want to understand our listeners, don't we, Mark?
We really, really do. Listeners, we love hearing from you guys. We love it when you get in touch with us via the email, hello@moonshots.io, getting in touch via social media. But you can really navigate to our, let's call it our Moonshots base, our headquarters, where you can go and find all of our episodes, our mantras, and lots of other little goodies over at www.moonshots.io. You can navigate over, check out episode 122, Stephen Covey Part 2. We're going to have our show doc, our transcripts for all of our shows, as well as a handful of goodies up there as well. And one final little way, in case you do want to get in touch with us, you can navigate to our feedback button and you can leave us your thoughts, your tips, your tricks that you'd like us to focus on in the future, as well as give us some new recommendations. We've got a good backlog, Mike, actually, of shows. We're never going to run out of individuals to cover on the Moonshot Show because our listeners are so proactive in telling us who to go into.
Every time, like, was it Terry recently who came with two new guys, two new authors I hadn't heard of. They look fantastic, so thank you to Terry. Bettina got us onto Christine Lagarde. We really enjoy it when our listeners send in suggestions and ideas about what we should cover. I mean, we're really grateful for it, and we really encourage you to hit moonshots.io and send us all your thoughts, messages, and good vibes.
Fantastic. Please do, Moonshot listeners, because we do read, we do reply, and we do appreciate every time you guys get in touch with us.
Well, that sounds like we are ready to do some synergistic goodness, and that takes us to habit number 6, Mark, which is this idea of synergizing. Now, synergizing, I don't know what to make of that as a word. Like, give me some context, Mark.
I quite like the word of synergy because it combines some of the other habits. You know, we've covered now 5 of the 7 habits from Stephen Covey. And the combination of all of those, or as you say, the synergizing of all of those previous habits, equates to number 6. And it's a demonstration of this idea of synergy, which essentially allows you to open new possibilities, create maybe new alternatives or new ways of thinking, but ultimately engage an entire group in a productive environment that then creates that ultimate goal that you're looking for. So this next clip that we've got from Stephen Covey is the idea of synergizing.
Habit 6, synergize, in a sense, is the fruit of the spirit of win-win. Habit 4, the spirit of seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Habit 5. Then what happens is a very powerful thing. When people begin to interact together genuinely and they're open to each other's influence, they begin to get new insight. Something happens to them both. It creates the possibility of third alternatives, not the either-or approach, not win-lose, lose-win, not compromise. Compromise is 1 + 1 = 1.5. Positive synergy is 1 + 1 = 3. Negative synergy, 1 + 1 = 1/2. In other words, so much of the effort and energy is spent in the adversarialism, in conflict and defensive and protective communication, that literally it just wastes the energy of the enterprise, of the marriage, of the family. Anyone who's experienced sustained conflict and contention, they know that very little productivity can come out. So just remember those definitions. Synergy is where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Synergy means you can literally produce something that neither of you could have produced before, and even adding what each can produce separately, 1 + 1 = 2, is not synergy. Negative synergy, where there is internal contention and adversarialism, produces less than even what one person can usually produce on their own, because so much of the energy is wasted going in the wrong direction and is counterproductive. Now, the traditional paradigm is one of compromise. That's literally where most people think we end up realistically, and it often is the case if you're in low-trust cultures. But compromise isn't necessary if people will pay the price with habits 4, 5, and 6. The key to habit 6, synergize, in fact, you could almost say the fundamental principle of 6 is to always value differences. It's not something you just accept that there are differences. It's not something that you tolerate. It's not something that is legislated through diversity programs. It is something that you celebrate. I mean, genuinely. The strength lies in differences, not in similarities.
Oh boy, was Stephen Covey getting on a roll. I think he was pretty damn turbocharged by the end there, Mark. Again, wow, what a clip, right? What a thought. Celebrate the differences, embrace the fact that we're not all the same. I mean, how boring would life be if we were all the same? I mean, this to me is such just a great way of living life. But I want to try and pitch you where I think this comes into play, Mark. I think the win-win construct, habit 4, is really good at making sure that you're thinking about the person across the other side of the table, and whether they're a peer, a colleague, a client, you're creating a win for them and a win for you. Okay. I think synergize is a discrete level higher. It's not just a win-win, but that win-win is truly the equation of 1 + 1 = 3, that together we are doing something we could never do on our own. Somehow that the sum is greater than the parts. And I think these are special friendships, special partnerships, relationships with your colleagues, with your clients and your partners. This synergize idea is the search for not just mediocrity, but to go for great. And the way to get there is embracing the fact that people are different. Get used to it. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and go after that special magic. Great stuff, isn't it, Mark?
So good, so good. I love this idea of the third alternative. It's such a wonderful, visual metaphor in my mind, when you're not compromising, you're not settling on something that's a little bit easy, but you're finding that next alternative insight, that third option that might be out there, that 1 + 1 = 3. What a wonderful idea.
I gotta agree. And it's probably one of the most challenging of the habits, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a little bit more confronting, isn't it? It's quite hard to sometimes work with people that you kind of don't agree with. The tendency is to find and hang out with people that are very similar to you.
Very tempting.
Because it's safe, right? It's safe and it's easy. But actually, particularly, I think in work, when you can value, or as Stephen calls it, celebrate the differences in people and sidestep any of that kind of negative energy or those obstacles, as Ron Holiday would say, and you can get through it together.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, can you just imagine the possibilities, the creative solutions that you might be able to come up with? Very, very hard and sometimes a little bit challenging, but the results, as Stephen would say, those incremental moments would be far greater.
Yeah. And so I think it's really about getting comfortable with the fact that everyone's going to have at least a slightly different point of view. And why do you think we struggle with that? I think it's rare that we see this idea of real synergy, as Covey would put it. We don't see it a lot. People are often very stuck in the hand-to-hand combat of win-win, right? Or win-lose, and beating people and getting their idea across the line. Why do you think people struggle to have the courage to go for something special, where together we're doing something very unique and magical? Why is this 1 + 1 = 3 equation so damn hard?
I think it's because people might be afraid to be completely open.
Oh yeah, yep. True.
So if you unless you can't achieve what Stephen's really calling out, unless you really harness those first 3 habits, you really have that mastery over yourself. You've got confidence. You've got awareness, self-awareness. I think once you can get yourself onto that openness level, then that collaboration, the synergy, as habit 6 tells us, can really be explored. I don't know. I suspect that what holds people back from really, exposing themselves to those moments of synergy, those moments of difference, is because they're not willing to do it. They want to be the smartest person in the room. They want to be the individual whose idea is number one, as opposed to that 1 + 1 = 3, finding a solution together. That's what I suspect. But what do you reckon, Mike?
I think, yeah, maybe I think a thread that really comes to me for effective people who do the work and know their practice. I think if you haven't done the training and the homework,
that's true.
You're more reluctant to be open because you're actually not that confident that you actually know your stuff.
Exactly. You're afraid because you kind of know in yourself, I don't really know this.
Yeah. But the funny thing is nobody can know everything. So by just saying, hey, I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I wonder if, how might we? That's the real courage. I mean, in the end, you got to just do the work and know your craft. Whatever you do, whether you work in finance, whether you're a builder, an architect, a cook, a chef, a product builder, it doesn't matter. You got to know your stuff. You got to put in that work. But at a certain point, you're not going to have all of the answers. And having done the work and knowing you've put your best effort in means that you can build that confidence to synergize and say, look, let's go for something. Let's get a little uncomfortable. Let's be courageous here. Let's really go for something. Let's just not settle for okay. I think that's really the call out here, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And actually, I think it's kind of a call out for all 7 habits, isn't it? Rather than just being okay with yourself and putting up with moments of frustration with others, lacking moments of where you lack confidence, or maybe you're anxious, as Dale Carnegie's books were showing us to overcome. I think all of these 7 habits are Stephen Covey calling to us and saying, hey, look, it doesn't have to be just okay. You've got to be highly effective. You can be highly effective if you're willing to be open and challenge yourself. And what we found in that first show, episode 121, was all around self-mastery, wasn't it? It was all around getting yourself onto that solid foundation. And the 3 clips we've just heard are all around, teamwork, collaboration, as well as communication, and opening yourself up to the idea that your ideas could be better if you do collaborate. But as we've just been discussing, Mike, it can be a little bit of a challenge for ourselves. And this 7th habit, the final habit of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think demonstrates to you and I and our listeners how we can try each day to achieve this best version, this best practice, this best way of collaborating and mastering ourselves. And this 7th habit is called Sharpen the Saw. So the next clip we're going to hear from Stephen Covey is habit number 7, Sharpen the Saw.
Habit 7 is the habit of renewal. What are you doing? Well, you can see him sawing down this tree. I bet you're tired. I am. Well, how long you been doing it? Oh, it's been 2-3 hours. Oh, I bet you're really beat. Say, well, why don't you sharpen the saw? Too busy sawing, dum-dum. How many here have ever been too busy driving, you didn't take time to get gas? In physics, it's called the Second Law of Thermodynamics. Everything breaks down. Entropy. It becomes disordered. The opposite of sharpening the saw is to leave it dull until the blade breaks, till the mind becomes dull, the spirit insensitive, the body flabby, where everything has gone to pot. The concept of sharpening the saw, personally, interpersonally, managerially, organizationally, is the concept of continuous improvement, Kaizen, continuous learning, forever getting better. Habit 7 is the habit that focuses on production capability. Habit 7, if done right, automatically develops the other 6 habits because it takes a high level of proactivity and of responsibility to consistently sharpen the saw. I do not know of one activity that has as great a leverage factor in life as habit 7. What do I mean by leverage? See, if you put the fulcrum in the middle and you put in 1 unit of effort here, you get out 1 unit of productivity here. If you move that fulcrum over, you can put in 1 unit of effort here and get out 100 units of productivity over there. Habit 7 moves the fulcrum over. You may only spend a few hours in an entire week, a week made up of 168 hours. And those few hours will affect the quality, the productivity, the satisfaction, the quality of relationships, the quality of decision-making of every other hour. But the problem is, habit 7 lies in quadrant 2. It is not urgent. That's why most people neglect it. They do it very unsystematically. They hit and miss on it. Sometimes they get kind of imbalanced on it. They focus only in one dimension. See, basically there are 4 dimensions in life: the body, the mind, the spirit, and relationships. We call that the social, emotional side. Social is our relationship with others. Emotional is our relationship with ourselves. Those are basically the 4 dimensions of organizations as well. It has its economic side to produce the bottom line towards some mission within a certain value system. That is the spiritual side. It must also have its culture of high trust. That's the social side. In order to have empowerment in the development and use of people's talents, that's the mental side. So those are the 4 dimensions. If you study all of history and psychology and philosophy, inevitably you'll find the same 4 dimensions constantly mentioned. But all 4 need to be attended to in a consistent and regular and balanced way in order to properly sharpen the saw.
Holy smoke. Stephen Covey is just knocking me off my chair every clip. I mean, this stuff is so good, Mark. I mean, he has catapulted into my top 5 moonshot gurus. I'm just saying, Mark.
Yeah, I got to admit, that final clip from Stephen Covey there, rounding off the 7 habits, rounding off the 2 shows, for me demonstrates why he belongs not only in the timeless classics, but Mike, he's got to be in the top 5 of the Moonshots shows, because his tips and habits, they just sing to us, don't they?
They do. I mean, for me, this is healthy mind, healthy body. For me, this is like, if you need to be good at work, you need to be good at home. This is about feeding, supporting, nourishing all the different facets of your being. And I mean, you know, the interesting thing I reflect upon is, as soon as COVID struck, I started running last year. And that was my way of having a little bit of freedom. But I felt that with all the challenges that brought in every part of my life, the one thing I could do was take control and get an enormous amount of exercise. I was just looking here because it made me think, you know, so last year I either ran or walked 2,234 kilometers. And to put that in perspective, in 2019, I only did 524. The only point I'm trying to make here is, when I faced this great challenge, you know, I didn't get COVID, I didn't get a cold or anything, but there was this enormous mental, social thing going on around me. The response I knew I had to do was I had to sharpen the saw. You know, I had to get the body right. You know, lots of exercise. Another one is, if you're exercising a lot, you should take some sort of physical relief, like take really good baths, turn off all your devices, talk to your friends, be with your friends, catch up with your folks. You know, like, you've got to go through that entire list. You've got to write the journal. You got to do the meditate. Like all of this system is a search for harmony between those 4 quadrants that he mentioned, those 4 interdependent things. And I think we always feel a bit off when one of them has been neglected, don't we?
Yeah, you do, and I quite like the ownership. By the way, holy smokes, that's a lot of kilometers. I like how you've brought this back to the ownership. You know, this is the physical workout or the physical exercise element is very consistent with what Tom Brady would tell us. It's very consistent with the concept of owning your physical reaction, like Wim Hof as well. And it's true. You can, in an unpredictable situation, scenario, world, context, you can own how your body is still stimulated, can't you? You can go out and not only practice the physical work, but remember the mind can be worked out as well with journaling, something we talk about a lot on the show. That act of self-reflection kind of feels, to me at least, like that's when I journal, I give myself that mental workout because I'm reflecting on my interpretation of stuff. You know, following last week's show, Mike, I was journaling away and I was thinking about whether I had a proactive approach, whether I was thinking with the end in mind, and whether I was, starting with the first things first. And that was really important to me because it was kind of a good two-hander to go alongside the physical exercise and movement piece as well. You know, really considering that mental or spiritual, I suppose, workout felt very valid to me. And I know that it's pretty valid to you as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would say I'm not an expert. I'm aware of these, mind, body, soul, heart, whatever you want to name them as. For me, I'm very aware of if I am pushing really hard with work, I try to become aware of where there's potential imbalance, and I'm actively kind of reviewing that. I would say the most practical tip I can give here is to name these specific actions and habits as daily tasks. This honestly is so useful, even after doing it for years and years. For example, if you look at my Todoist, which is my daily task manager, and while we're live here on the show, I'm going to go into my daily goals. I have journaling as a daily activity, working out, listening to a podcast, sleeping well, time with my wife, time with my son, eating well, burning 3,500 kilojoules, and breathing exercises. Those occur in my to-do list every single day. And that's how I sharpen the saw, is by making them that present in my workflow, in my task manager. They are set as recurring daily tasks every single day of the year.
That's fantastic. I'm looking at mine as well, Mike. I've also got journaling and I've also got exercise.
Good.
And I've got, it's something that I don't, it's well overdue, gratitude check-ins as well.
Yes. A very good exercise for journaling. Very, very, very good. Wow, Mark. Holy smoke. I mean, this was just turned out to be one of the most epic shows we've ever done, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I to be honest, we probably could have made it into 3 shows, just to give our listeners a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain of how you and I try and replicate these habits in our own lives. We could have even tried to take our listeners on that journey, but I'm pleased at how we've been able to bring them into those 2 sections. One, all about that mindset, that foundational work on yourself. And then today's episode, really about that activity on the social as well as the emotional elements of collaboration, and ultimately this huge, big call out that Stephen has that connects everything together, which is personal and continuous development. I think that's such a powerful book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that it's going onto my my shelf, Mike.
It's pretty funny how we surprise ourselves that the classics really are classics. It's a bit ironic, isn't it?
Well, look, it kind of shows, similar to, the seek first, then to understand, seek first to understand, then to be understood. You and I are learning out loud together on the show. We are looking to understand. We're exposing ourselves into these different these ways of working and the way of reacting to things with our listeners. So actually, I kind of like it. It's kind of, I hope our listeners feel it's pretty authentic.
Yes, me too. Well, Mark, here we are. I just want to say thank you for helping me wrestle the epic, the titanic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was pretty good, wasn't it?
It's got to be the top 5, maybe top 3.
Yeah,
actually.
I
know.
Well, Mark, thanks again. And thank you to you, our listeners, all the moonshotters all around the world. We are so grateful for your support, for your feedback, for your likes, your ratings, your suggestions. We are really, really thankful for them. And today we can all be thankful together for Stephen Covey and his work, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And this epic 2-episode journey started with self-mastery, where it was all about being proactive, focusing on that circle of influence. And then he challenged us. Habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. Think about our legacy. How will we be remembered? And as we go into the world to do those as an effective individual, we need to put first things first. We need to set priorities. And here in this second episode, we have gone deep into the social mastery, thinking win-win, making it a win for you and those around you. And in order to do that, we need to understand them first. So when in doubt, shut up and listen. Because if you do, you might uncover that magic formula, 1 + 1 = 3. That's right. Synergy, the combining of forces to do some magic. And magic is powered by our being. And that's mind, body, soul, and spirit. You need to sharpen that saw, and you will be able to go out into the world and be the very best version of yourselves. So that's it for the Moonshots podcast. That's a wrap.